Okay, welcome back everyone. So, as you probably saw, a traitor spawned literally as I went to sleep after ending the video. I managed to get a cactus and beetroot seeds from him, which is nice, because that means I don't need to find a desert in case I ever need cactus. So I'm going to go plant my cactus. We'll do it here. Boom. Hopefully him and his llamas don't kill themselves. Put that in here. Yes, I know I can turn those hay bales into food, but I'd rather save them. But yeah. So you just had to grow while it was inside. Alright, let's go. So our main goal is find more diamonds, find more iron, and if we can find more, whatchamacallit, emeralds. I was gonna say diamonds again. That would be nice. I'm going to make this a little longer. There we go. NBT data is amazing. And we'll have this be the stop. Wait. Tough. Alright. Gravel. But, yeah. So, that's a lot of gravel. I got, Mass Effect Legendary Edition on freaking, PlayStation. I've been playing that a lot. I forgot how much I loved Morgan as a character. Like, he's both probably one of the most tragic characters in the game, and also the fucking best. For those of you who don't know too much about Mass Effect, I'll give a basic rundown. This will also be helpful for those who just plumb forgot. But Morden is a part of a race of aliens known as the Solarians. They live considerably less than humans. They are, I think, the shortest lived species in the galaxy, and I think humans follow shortly thereafter. And then I think it goes Batarians, Turians. I think, yeah, it goes Batarians, Turians, Krogan, and then Asari. Krogan and Asari being the longest lived races in the galaxy. Asari can live for several centuries. It also helps that they can mate with literally any species. It's actually favorable, more favorable for them to mate with other species than their own, because inbreeding negatively affects them as well. We're talking about the Solarians. So, Solarians have a very bad relationship with the Krogan. So, several hundred years, I believe, before humans found spaceflight, the Solarians and the Asari found the they refer to it as the Citadel. It turns out that the Citadel is actually a massive space relay utilized to go into dark space. So, for those of you who don't know what dark space is, it's the area of space in between galaxies. There is no light out there, so that's why it's called dark space. The more you know. But anyways, it's the most it's the biggest space relay in the galaxy. When they found it, they didn't realize that's what it was, and so they thought it was the hub of the galaxy, that the previous spacefaring species that they've dubbed the Protheans utilized as their hub of like government and everything. So they made a similar hub, and trillions of people live on this space relay. The reason why they don't know it's a space relay is because it doesn't look like the other ones. And so they think the Protheans made it. Turns out the Protheans didn't. The Asari founded it first, and then the Solarians kind of showed up. And the Solarians, for the most part, are a very intelligent species. As Morden says, every species has its idiots, but as a whole, Solarians are very intelligent, and it's one of those across the board things. Excuse me. Perfect. And so the Solarians have this issue that not only are they one of the smartest species, they are also the most curious species. Because they're so short-lived, they want to experience as much as they can. And so they very much are ADHD about everything, especially Morden. Morden is like the definitive example of what I would assume a Solarian would be if a Solarian had ADHD. And it's because that's what helps him process information and come up with the solutions that he does. But the Solarians, in their curiosity and exploration of the galaxy, accidentally found a race of very intelligent insectoids called the Rachni. The Rachni were a very powerful species, and they exist in sort of a hive mind. Now, they normally can't communicate with other species, but they ended up figuring out they can communicate through essentially possessing corpses, specifically Asari corpses. But they didn't do this they started attacking and killing everything. Well, it turns out the Rachni of that era were indoctrinated by the race that created the Keepers, the people who keep the Citadel running. And they were indoctrinated to essentially kill anything intelligent. And so the Rachni War started. Well, the Solarians were like, we need a solution because the Rachni are killing everything. And so they went and they found another race called the Krogan. And the Krogan were they were technologically advanced, like what we would consider to be technologically advanced for our time, but for a spacefaring species like the Solarians and Asari, they were considered fairly primitive. And they are a very warlike race. And so the Solarians went off and uplifted them so that they'd fight and kill the Rachni for them and cause the genocide of the Rachni. Well, everything's fine and dandy until the Krogan, who the reason why they were uplifted, started breeding very fucking fast. So fast that they needed more colonies, and so they started what was referred to as the Krogan Rebellion, and essentially invading other species' territories. And so the Solarians needed help getting rid of the Krogan. And so their solution was to have another species that, I don't know if the Solarians uplifted them or not, or if they happened to have come onto the scene around this time. I'm not very familiar with like the intricate lore. But the Turians showed up, and they were also a very warlike race, but they have an honor system, essentially. And so they were like, yeah, sure, we'll help. And so the Solarians built a... Oh, that's my fucking dog. I thought someone was opening my door. Front door. Which concerned me because it's locked. And it was just the dog walking upstairs. Anyways, the Solarians came up with a plague called the genophage, a biochemical virus that, when it affects the Krogan, severely reduces their birth rate significantly, making it so that it doesn't make them necessarily sterile, but not all children of the Krogan race survive being born. And a lot of people refer to it as a sterility plague, but according to Morden, it's not actually a sterility plague. It doesn't affect their ability to breed and have children, but it affects the ability of the children to survive childbirth, essentially. So it's not technically a sterility plague, but it's close enough that a lot of people in the universe and players go, it doesn't really matter. If it is or isn't, it's close enough to be one that it's, at that point, just arguing semantics. But, so this happens before more than one of your companions' times. He, I believe, happens to be nearing his last decade of life by the time you meet him in-game. So he's a very old Solarian. And he happens to be a retired member of the Solarian Special Task Group, which is basically their Black Ops equivalent. Because the Solarians themselves aren't a very militant species, they're not physically strong, they excel in information gathering and assassinations. So their special task group, that's their primary function, is to gather information. Well, they realized that the Krogan were starting to adapt to the genophage. And because the Krogan are a very violent species, it's coded in their DNA for them to be violent. The Solarians were very worried that if they were allowed to completely adapt away from the genophage, their birth rates would spike and the Krogan rebellions would basically be jump-started in full swing. So the Special Task Group took all of their scientists and created a modification for the genophage. And Morden Solis is responsible for coming up with it, I believe. Or at least he holds himself responsible. And when you meet him, you can see that he feels guilty about it, but he justifies that it was the only way and there was no other option. He convinces himself that the modification of the genophage was the only solution. And so I don't come back to monsters. But he convinces himself that there was no other way to overcome the natural aggression of the Krogan, because war is essentially their culture. They need the ability to essentially destroy. And so a lot of the species believe that if given the opportunity, that the Krogan would cause a lot of death. Obviously, that turns out not to be the case. Because, you can choose to undo the genophage in one of the games. But, actually. But Morden justifies the genophage as being the only way to prevent the Krogans from destroying everything. And You can see that Morden really cares for the Krogan, and I think this is more of a side effect of having spent so much time trying to... Okay. Sorry, scam caller. But you see that he cares for them. This is probably a side effect of having spent so much time creating the modification to the genophage that he has essentially a stake in their culture to a degree. He's so familiar with them on a cultural and genetic level that to a degree he does care for the Krogan, and he's upset that he had to do that, but you can't convince him that it wasn't the right choice until his loyalty mission, where he starts to doubt himself. And most of the game up to that point is trying to convince him that the genophage was never the correct answer. Ooh, smooth basalt. That it was never the right answer, and modifying the genophage so that it harmed the Krogan even more was a very bad thing to do. Excuse me. And you see this in real life. People justifying terrible actions that they themselves caused or someone else caused, because they fully convinced themselves there was no other option. This was for the best. Which, obviously, that's never the case. It was never for the best, and a lot of innocent people ended up getting hurt because of this decision. But you can't convince them otherwise until either they die or something happens to them that causes their entire worldview to essentially be shattered. That they can no longer justify their actions. We are getting all sorts of nice building materials. Nice. Oh, I'm glad I decided to... mine out all this deep slate. I decided to go for the deep slate because I think the deep slate's a nice building material when you turn it into bricks. But did we end amethyst? But you, on his loyalty mission, you encounter his apprentice, and his apprentice pretty much tells him, "You were a jackass." And Morden takes that personally. Like, very personally. Now, I will admit his apprentice does not actually call him a jackass, but that was just my paraphrased version of the events that happened. But that's essentially what his apprentice tells him. That his apprentice is the way he is when you meet him, and does the things he does because in his eyes, Morden justified that the taught him that the ends justified the means, essentially. And Morden realized his mistake in that instant. That the thing he had been denying, that what he did to the Krogan was the best possible option, may not have been the best possible option. Something he instinctively knew but refused to admit to, because if he admitted to it, then he was wrong. And if he was wrong, then he hurt a whole bunch of people. And I think that's one of the things I like the most about Morden is he ends up realizing that he didn't just hurt the Krogan, he hurt everyone he worked with, and potentially also hurt the galaxy as a whole. In his attempt to save it and become a hero of his people, he ended up hurting far more than he ever thought he would. Part of him was okay with hurting the Krogan because, well, the Krogan potentially would have just caused so much death and destruction. So hurting them was fine, but when he realized I hurt my apprentice, an unimpressionable child who I took under my wing, who was like a son to me, that was when he realized I've done something monstrous. I am not the man I thought I was. And then he goes on to try and correct his mistake. And he ends up sacrificing himself to save the Krogan. I mean, he ends up being one of the best written characters in the game, next to Thane Krios, who also shows up in the second game. They are some of the best written characters because they're such tragic characters, because that's what they're meant to be. And I just love those characters because they both did horrible things in their lives, and they're actually, now that I think about it, they're basically the same character. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but Thane and Morden Solus are basically one and the same. Thane was trained from the age of 6 to be an assassin. Because they were essentially taught that being an assassin was necessary. It was essentially a necessary evil for him to become an assassin. And while it was a necessary evil, he actually doesn't feel any regret for what he's done, but he does realize innately that he caused a lot of death, and he wants to make up for it before he dies. He ends up contracting a disease inherent to his people, called Kepler's syndrome, if I remember correctly. And Kepler's syndrome is basically irreversible. His people originate from a they originate from like a desert planet, but because well, not necessarily desert, but a more arid climate. And his people ended up, before finding uh, space flight technology, overpopulating and destroying each other. And so they ended up getting uplifted by another species called the Hanar, who are very capable of defending themselves in water, but not they're very slow out of water. So they saved what they could of the Drell, which is what Thane is. And bringing them to their homeworld, which is basically a giant ocean. It sounds like from the description that there's land, because I don't think you ever go there. But for the most part, the Hanar live in the ocean. And the Drell, who come from a very arid climate, eventually develop Kepler syndrome, because essentially water gets in their lungs and destroys their body, and they basically suffocate. Thane even says once his Kepler syndrome reaches its essentially pinnacle, he'll suffocate to death. And it's a very horrific way to go. But he's essentially come to terms with the fact that he'll die because, being an assassin, he's accepted that his death is inevitable. And he has no qualms about dying, but he doesn't want to die having left too much darkness in the world. So he goes and you find him while he's killing essentially terrible individuals. The person he's going after hires you to kill her sister, who was a slaver. And so he shows up, kills her, and then you hire him. He was like, yeah, I'll help you. A suicide mission sounds right up my alley. And I'll stop a whole bunch of very bad people who are abducting innocent civilians. And you're like, cool, glad to have you aboard, Thane. And Thane is basically the opposite of Morden. He realizes what he's done is bad, and while he doesn't necessarily... He's not necessarily upset, or like... I don't know, not upset, but like... regretful for it. He does realize that what he was doing wasn't good. And so he decides to go after bad people, so that when he does eventually end up dying, the amount of bad people that he left in the world is significantly lower than it was while he was alive. Essentially, he goes Punisher on a lot of people. But like, unlike the Punisher, who does it out of revenge, Thane does it as essentially an act of penance. Thane realizes that he's not a good person. He accepts it and decides to make sure that other people who know that they're also not good people and are continuing to do bad things can no longer do those things when he's not around. And he's basically the opposite of Morden in that sense, that he's essentially made peace with what he is and who he is, and is essentially trying to better himself and the universe as an act of penance. Whereas Morden tries to live most of his life in blissful ignorance, while also realizing sort of internally that he should make it up to the universe the things that he did. And you find Morden in basically like a clinic, trying to, funnily enough, cure a biochemical bioengineered virus that's killing a lot of aliens. I actually just realized the irony of that. But like, yeah, both are like very tragic characters, and they're basically the same character, but like different coins, I guess. Different sides of the same coin. They're very tragic characters, but they're like some of the best written characters in Mass Effect, in my opinion. Alright, I've been talking a lot. Yeah, I should end the episode here. My throat's starting to hurt. Ow. I've been Major Wolf. This has been my mining project. I might talk more about Mass Effect in the next episode. I may not. I don't know. But you guys have a wonderful day. And I can see you turning the night clock. Anyways, you all have a wonderful day. Try to leave the world a better place, and try not to do it by being terrible people. Alright, bye!